If someone had asked me 6 months ago to describe my marriage, I would have used words like stable, happy, and solid. Emily and I weren't the couple that flaunted our relationship on social media or had the picture-perfect love story, but we were partners in every sense of the word, or so I thought. We had built a life that looked good from the outside. We traveled often, shared inside jokes, and had plans for a family. The day Emily told me she was pregnant, I thought the final piece of our puzzle had fallen into place. I envisioned us as parents, building a future together, stronger than ever. But the miscarriage changed everything. It happened at 8 weeks, just long enough for us to start imagining names, nursery colors, and the tiny heartbeat we'd heard at the first ultrasound. When we lost the baby, Emily shut down. At first, I chalked it up to grief. I threw myself into being supportive, giving her space when she needed it and holding her when she broke down. But as the weeks passed, the space between us grew. Emily became distant, cold. She avoided eye contact, spent hours on her phone, and brushed off my attempts to reconnect. Our conversations dwindled to monosyllabic exchanges, and our once vibrant home became suffocatingly quiet. I was desperate to fix things. I thought if I could show her how much I cared, how much I was still invested in us, she'd come back to me. I planned date nights, wrote her little notes, even suggested we take a trip to get away from the pain. But nothing worked. One Friday evening, I was sitting alone in our living room, scrolling through my phone, when Claire's name appeared on the screen. Claire was one of Emily's closest friends, someone I'd always liked and trusted. But the tone of her voice when I answered wasn't the warm, bubbly Claire I knew. "John," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to say this, but you need to know the truth." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, and then I heard her take a deep breath. "Emily's been seeing someone else. I can't keep this to myself anymore. You deserve to know." The words hit me like a freight train. My first instinct was to deny it, to defend Emily. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "She's grieving. She wouldn't." "I'm sorry, John," Claire interrupted, her tone filled with regret. "I have proof." And then she sent the photo. When I opened the message, my heart stopped. There was Emily, sitting in a dimly lit bar, her body pressed against another man's. Her head rested on his shoulder, her smile radiant in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't just a friendly photo. It was intimate, undeniable. "This started after the miscarriage," Claire explained over the phone. "I think she's been using it as an escape, but that doesn't excuse what she's done. I've been watching you bend over backward for her, and it's killing me to see you suffer while she—" I hung up before she could finish. My hands trembled as I stared at the picture, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And why? The next morning, I couldn't hold back. As Emily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong, I slammed the photo down in front of her. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice rising. Her face drained of color as she stared at the image. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but instead, she sighed and set her phone down. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "Don't insult me, Emily," I snapped. "I've spent months trying to fix us, and this is what you've been doing behind my back?" Her eyes welled up with tears, but they didn't move me. "I didn't know how to handle everything," she said. "I felt so alone after the miscarriage. And then I met someone who—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. "Who what?" I demanded. "Who made you forget you had a husband? Who made you feel like it was okay to throw away everything we built?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, walked to the bedroom, and began packing a bag. "I think it's best if I leave," she said, her back to me. And just like that, she was gone. No fight, no apology, no attempt to salvage what was left. The days that followed were a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. I called in sick to work, unable to face the world. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo, Emily smiling, carefree, while I sat at home, trying to piece us back together. Friends and family reached out, but I avoided their calls. I couldn't bear their pity or their well-meaning advice. The only person I spoke to was Claire, who checked in regularly to see how I was holding up. "You need to talk to someone," she said during one of our conversations. Emily's friend Megan is a psychologist. Maybe she could help. The idea of seeing a therapist felt like admitting defeat, but I was desperate. The weight of everything was too much to bear alone. Little did I know, that decision would set off a chain of events I could never have anticipated. Events that would turn my heartbreak into something far darker. Walking into Megan's office for the first time felt like stepping onto a battlefield unarmed. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say or how much I was willing to reveal. My emotions were a tangled mess of anger, grief, and humiliation, and the idea of untangling them in front of someone, especially someone who knew Emily, felt impossible. Megan greeted me with a warm smile, her demeanor calm and professional. "John, it's good to see you. Please, have a seat." The first few sessions were brutal. Megan had a way of asking questions that dug deep, pulling emotions and memories to the surface that I tried to bury. I told her about the miscarriage, about Emily's withdrawal, and finally, about the photo Claire had sent me. She said she felt alone. I spat out one session, my voice shaking with anger. But what about me? I lost that baby too. I was right there, grieving with her, and she threw me aside like I didn't matter. Megan nodded, her gaze steady. "It's natural to feel angry, John. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when you've given so much of yourself to someone. But the question is, what do you want to do with that anger?" I didn't have an answer. At the time, all I knew was that I wanted Emily to hurt the way she'd hurt me. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to understand the destruction she'd left in her wake. As the weeks went on, the sessions with Megan began to shift. While we still talked about the affair and its aftermath, we also started exploring other parts of my life. My career, my friendships, my identity outside of my marriage. Slowly, I began to feel a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in months: control. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Megan suggested we grab coffee. "You've been doing a lot of heavy lifting in here," she said with a smile. "Sometimes it helps to step outside and just talk." We ended up at a quiet cafe, the conversation drifting from therapy topics to more casual subjects. I learned that Megan loved art, had a dry sense of humor, and wasn't afraid to challenge me when I tried to dodge difficult questions. As the evening wore on, I found myself laughing, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. For the first time since Emily's betrayal, I felt a flicker of light in the darkness. Our coffee meetups became a regular occurrence. At first, they felt like an extension of therapy, a way for me to process my emotions in a less formal setting. But as the weeks went by, the lines between therapist and friend began to blur. One night, after a few drinks at a bar, Megan leaned in close and said, "You're stronger than you think, John. You've been through hell, but you're still standing. That says something." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For so long, I'd felt like a victim, like the shattered remains of the man I used to be. But Megan saw me differently. She saw someone who was capable of rising from the ashes. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. When we pulled apart, Megan looked at me with a mix of surprise and something else, something that made my heart race. "This probably isn't a good idea," she said softly, but she didn't move away. "Maybe not," I replied, my voice steady, "but it feels right." That night, we ended up in her apartment, where months of suppressed emotions boiled over into something raw and consuming. For the first time since Emily left, I felt powerful, like I was taking back a piece of myself. The next morning, as Megan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. What had started as therapy had turned into something far more complicated. But instead of guilt, I felt an unexpected sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about moving on, it was about reclaiming control. Emily had made me feel powerless, like a spectator in my own life. But now, with Megan, I was the one calling the shots. When Megan woke up, she looked at me with a mixture of uncertainty and vulnerability. "What happens now?" she asked. "We take it one day at a time," I replied, giving her a reassuring smile. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Megan had been a lifeline when I was drowning, a way for me to process the chaos Emily had left behind. But now, she was something else entirely, an unwitting pawn in a game I was determined to win. The seeds of revenge had been planted, and I was ready to see them grow. The morning after my night with Megan, I felt strangely calm. There was no guilt, no second-guessing my decisions, just a quiet certainty that what I'd done was right. Emily had shattered me, but I was finally piecing myself back together. And as I looked over at Megan sleeping beside me, I realized I had found the perfect way to even the score. For weeks, I had been consumed by thoughts of Emily's betrayal. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the cold indifference with which she had left. No apology could ever make up for what she'd done. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same sense of worthlessness that she had inflicted on me. And now, I had my chance. Megan and I continued to see each other, though I kept things on my terms. I played the role of the grateful, recovering man, leaning on her for support and validation. I knew how to make her feel needed, how to keep her invested without giving too much of myself away. She had no idea that every smile, every kiss, every vulnerable moment I shared with her was calculated. Megan wasn't just a rebound or a friend with benefits. She was my weapon. Meanwhile, I began laying the groundwork for the next phase of my plan. I reached out to Claire, the friend who had exposed Emily's affair, and casually dropped hints about my newfound relationship. You know, I said during one of our phone calls, Megan's been a huge help. I don't know how I would have gotten through all this without her. Claire hesitated. Megan? As in Emily's friend Megan? Yeah, I replied, keeping my tone light. She's been amazing. We've grown really close. Claire didn't say much after that, but I knew the wheels were turning. She would tell Emily. It was only a matter of time. It happened 2 weeks later. I was out with Megan at a small restaurant when I saw Emily walk in. She spotted us almost immediately, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of me sitting across from one of her closest friends. Megan didn't notice Emily at first. She was laughing at something I'd said, her hand resting lightly on mine. But when Emily approached our table, the color drained from Megan's face. Emily, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily crossed her arms, her gaze icy. So, this is how you've been spending your time, John? Sleeping with my friends? Megan looked at me, panic flashing in her eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered. Don't, Emily snapped, cutting her off. Don't even try to explain. I leaned back in my chair, a small smirk tugging at my lips. What's the problem, Emily? You made it clear you didn't want me anymore. I'm just moving on, like you did. Her jaw clenched, her composure slipping for the first time. This is low, even for you, she hissed. I shrugged. Maybe, but it feels pretty damn good to be the one making you uncomfortable for a change. Emily turned to Megan, her voice dripping with venom. I hope you realize what kind of man you're dealing with. He's not as innocent as he looks. And then she stormed out, leaving Megan and me sitting in stunned silence. After that night, things between Megan and me became strained. She started asking questions, probing for answers I wasn't ready to give. Did you know Emily would be there? She asked one evening as we sat on my couch. No, I lied. But does it matter? She's out of my life, and I'm trying to move forward. Isn't that what you wanted for me? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's just complicated. Emily and I were friends once, and now? Now you're with me, I said firmly. And Emily made her choice. She doesn't get to dictate what I do or who I see. Megan nodded reluctantly, but I could tell the encounter had shaken her. She was beginning to question the nature of our relationship, to wonder if she had been caught in something bigger than she realized. But I couldn't let her walk away, not yet. Over the next few weeks, I redoubled my efforts to keep Megan close. I showered her with attention, planned romantic dates, and made sure she felt like the center of my world. At the same time, I let subtle details about Emily slip into our conversations, just enough to keep Megan on edge. I ran into Claire today, I mentioned casually during dinner one night. She said Emily's been asking about us. Megan's fork paused midair. What did you tell her? Nothing, I said with a shrug. It's none of her business. Megan tried to hide her unease, but I could see the cracks forming. She was torn between her feelings for me and her lingering loyalty to Emily, and I was more than willing to exploit that conflict for my own gain. I didn't just want to hurt Emily. I wanted her to see how easily I could dismantle the life she had left behind. The final piece of the puzzle came together one evening when Megan confessed something I hadn't expected. "I think I love you," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. For a moment, I froze. Not because I felt the same way, I didn't, but because I knew how powerful those words could be. "I care about you too," I replied, carefully choosing my words. More than I ever thought I could after everything that happened with Emily. It wasn't a lie, exactly. I did care about Megan, in my own way. But love? Love wasn't part of the equation. Megan's confession gave me exactly what I needed: leverage. She was fully invested now, emotionally tied to someone who had no intention of staying. The trap was set, and I was ready to spring it. Megan's confession lingered in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. She had told me she loved me, and I'd given her just enough to hold on to without truly committing. It wasn't love that drove me, it was strategy. Every step, every word, was part of a carefully crafted plan to unravel the remnants of Emily's life. For a while, Megan seemed content. She leaned into the illusion I had created, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. We continued our routine of dates and quiet evenings at my place, but there was a growing tension between us. She had given me her heart, and deep down, I think she sensed that I hadn't done the same. One night, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, Megan turned to me, her expression hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, keeping my tone light. "Do you think we're healthy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She sighed, tucking her legs beneath her. "I mean, how we started. It wasn't exactly conventional. And with everything that happened with Emily, sometimes I wonder if this is—" She trailed off, searching for the right words. "Real?" I finished for her. She nodded, biting her lip. I leaned back, feigning a thoughtful expression. "I think what we have is as real as it gets. Emily's choices brought us together, but they don't define us. We define us." It was the answer she wanted to hear, and for the moment, it seemed to satisfy her. But I knew Megan wasn't the type to let go of her doubts easily. As Megan wrestled with her feelings, I shifted my focus back to Emily. I wasn't done with her, not yet. I reached out to Claire under the guise of catching up, but my real goal was to plant seeds of chaos. "Emily's been on my mind lately," I admitted during our conversation. "Not because I want her back, obviously, but because I wonder if she even realizes the damage she caused." Claire hesitated. "She's been struggling, if I'm honest. I think seeing you with Megan shook her." "Good," I said without hesitation. Claire let out a nervous laugh. "John, I get why you're angry, but don't you think it's time to move on? You've got Megan now." "I am moving on," I said, my tone even. "But that doesn't mean Emily gets to walk away unscathed." Claire didn't respond, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. That was fine by me. The more tension I created, the better. Meanwhile, Megan's doubts began to surface more frequently. She started asking questions about my feelings, about my intentions, and even about Emily. "Do you still think about her?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Sometimes," I admitted, knowing that honesty, or the illusion of it, would keep her close. "But not in the way you think. It's not about missing her. It's about understanding how someone I trusted so completely could betray me like that." Megan reached for my hand, her touch gentle. "You didn't deserve what she did to you. No one does." "I know," I said softly, turning to face her, "and that's why I'm so grateful for you. You've shown me that there's still good in the world." It was a calculated move, and it worked. Megan's eyes filled with emotion, and I could see her resolve strengthening. She wanted to believe in us, even if deep down, she sensed that something was off. The turning point came during a dinner party hosted by one of Megan's friends. It was a small gathering, just a handful of people, including a mutual acquaintance of hers and Emily's. As the night went on, the conversation turned to relationships. Someone brought up infidelity, and the room buzzed with opinions and anecdotes. "I think cheating is the ultimate betrayal," Megan said, her voice firm. "There's no excuse for it. If you're unhappy, you leave. You don't destroy someone's trust like that." Her words hung in the air, and I noticed the mutual acquaintance shifting uncomfortably. "Well," she said hesitantly, Sometimes people cheat because they're lost. It's not always black and white. Megan frowned. That doesn't justify it. No, but it explains it, the woman replied, glancing at me briefly before continuing. People make mistakes when they're hurting. It doesn't mean they're bad people. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see Megan piecing something together in her mind. She didn't say anything else, but I knew this conversation would come back to haunt us. After the dinner party, Megan was unusually quiet. I could tell her mind was racing, but I didn't push her to talk. I wanted her to stew in her uncertainty, to question everything she thought she knew about me and about herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was hesitant. Do you think people can change? Depends on the person, I said casually. Why do you ask? She shook her head. No reason. Just something that's been on my mind. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way her eyes lingered on me, searching for answers she couldn't articulate. But I knew. I knew because I had orchestrated this moment, carefully planting the seeds of doubt that would eventually unravel her. Megan had been my ally, my confidant, and my weapon. But now, she was becoming a liability, and I couldn't afford liabilities. The cracks in Megan's composure were becoming harder to ignore. She was no longer the confident, grounded woman who had once guided me through my darkest moments. Now, she was restless, her unease bubbling just beneath the surface. I watched her spiral with a detached curiosity. She questioned me more often, lingered in silence longer, and seemed on edge even during our quietest moments together. It was clear she was piecing things together, though she didn't yet have the full picture. One evening, as we sat on my couch, she turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen before, doubt mixed with something sharper. John, she said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course, I replied, keeping my tone steady. Why did you pursue me? Her voice wavered, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. The question caught me off guard, but I recovered quickly. I didn't pursue you, I said with a soft smile. We just happened. You were there for me when I needed someone most. She nodded, but her expression didn't change. I know, but sometimes I wonder if it was more than that. Like, maybe I was just convenient. Her words were a direct hit, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned forward, taking her hand in mine. Megan, you're more than convenient. You're the reason I'm still standing. Don't let your doubts take that away from us. She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my response. For a moment, I thought I'd diffused the tension, but the lingering uncertainty in her eyes told me otherwise. A week later, Megan's doubts came to a head. I was at work when she called me, her voice trembling. I ran into Claire today, she said without preamble. My stomach tightened, but I kept my tone casual. Oh, how's she doing? She told me something interesting. There it was. The moment I'd been anticipating. What did she say? Megan hesitated, as if weighing whether to confront me directly. Finally, she said, she mentioned how you'd been talking about Emily recently. How angry you still are. She said it didn't seem like you were over her. I exhaled slowly, feigning frustration. Megan, of course I'm still angry. She betrayed me. But that doesn't mean I want her back, or that I'm not serious about us. I know, she said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. It's just, I don't know, John. Sometimes it feels like I'm caught in the middle of something I don't fully understand. You're not in the middle of anything, I said firmly. Emily's in the past. You're my future. Don't let Claire stir up drama where there isn't any. Her silence told me she wasn't entirely convinced, but she let the subject drop, for now. The encounter with Claire had clearly shaken Megan, but it also served a purpose. It deepened the cracks I'd been carefully cultivating, pushing her closer to the edge. Meanwhile, I continued to escalate my efforts with Emily. I sent her texts under the guise of closure, knowing full well they would stir up old emotions. I just wanted you to know I forgive you. I hope you're doing well. Her response came almost immediately. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you. I hope you're happy too. It was a simple exchange, but it planted the seed of doubt I needed. Emily's response wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was an invitation, and I knew how to exploit it. One evening, as Megan and I sat in my apartment, I decided it was time to set my plan into motion. I casually mentioned Emily, watching as Megan's body tensed at the sound of her name. She reached out to me the other day, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Megan's eyes narrowed. Why? She said she's been reflecting on everything that happened. She wanted to apologize again, and I guess she wanted to make sure I'm okay. Megan's jaw tightened, her voice icy. And what did you say? I told her I'm moving on, I said with a shrug. That I've found someone who makes me happy. The tension in the room was palpable. Megan didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. Later that night, while Megan slept, I sent Emily another message. Talking to you again has brought back a lot of memories. I miss the good times we had. Her response was just as predictable as I'd hoped. I miss them too. The next day, I made sure Megan saw my phone. I left it on the counter, Emily's latest message conveniently open on the screen. When I returned to the kitchen, Megan was staring at the phone, her face pale. Care to explain this? She demanded, holding up the device. I feigned surprise, then guilt. Megan, it's not what it looks like. Really? She snapped. Because it looks like you've been messaging your ex-wife behind my back. She reached out to me, I said quickly. I didn't want to hide it, but I also didn't want to upset you. Well, congratulations, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You've managed to do both. Her anger was exactly what I'd expected, and exactly what I needed. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the moment when everything would unravel. As Megan stormed out of the apartment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had been a means to an end, and now, her purpose had been served. It was time for the final act. With Megan gone, the air in my apartment felt lighter. The carefully constructed tension, the web of manipulation, was unraveling exactly as I had planned. Megan was out of the picture now, and Emily was primed for the final move. Over the next week, I continued to message Emily, gradually lowering her guard. Our conversations became more personal, nostalgic even, as we tiptoed around the minefield of our shared history. Do you ever miss what we had? I asked one evening. Her response came quickly. I think about it a lot. We had something special, John. I just wish I hadn't ruined it. It was all too easy. Emily's guilt was a weapon she didn't realize I was wielding against her. I suggested we meet for coffee, framing it as an opportunity to clear the air and finally put the past behind us. She agreed, and 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, watching as she fidgeted nervously with her cup. You look good, she said, her voice tentative. So do you, I replied smoothly. It's been strange, not having you in my life. I won't lie, it's been hard. Her eyes softened, and I could see the cracks in her resolve. I never wanted to hurt you, John. I hope you know that. Maybe, I said, leaning forward, but you did. And I've spent months trying to understand why. Emily's expression crumbled. I was in a dark place. After the miscarriage, I felt like I was drowning. And instead of leaning on you, I ran. It was the worst mistake of my life. Her words were laced with sincerity, but they didn't move me. I'd heard enough apologies to know they were meaningless. Still, I nodded, pretending to absorb her remorse. We can't change the past, I said, my tone carefully measured. But maybe we can move forward. Emily's eyes widened. Do you mean that? I do, I lied. If we can forgive each other, maybe we can find a way to start over. It was the opening she needed, the lifeline she'd been hoping for. And it was exactly where I wanted her. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I began spending more time together. It started with coffee and casual texts, but soon, we were meeting for dinners, sharing laughs, and falling back into old patterns. She was cautious at first, but as I continued to play the role of the repentant, hopeful ex-husband, her walls came down. One evening, as we sat in her apartment, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. I don't deserve this chance, John, but I want to make it right. I want us to be happy again. I smiled, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. So do I. She leaned in, and when our lips met, it was almost laughable how easily she had fallen into the trap. For weeks, I let Emily believe we were rebuilding something real. I gave her just enough affection, just enough attention, to keep her invested. But all the while, I was planning the moment when it would all come crashing down. The opportunity came on a Friday evening. Emily had invited me over for dinner, a gesture that felt almost domestic in its simplicity. She was beaming as she set the table, talking about how excited she was for the future. "You know," she said, pouring us each a glass of wine, "I've been thinking about us moving back in together. Starting fresh?" I nodded, playing along. "I think that sounds perfect." She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. It was time. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us. "Before we move forward, there's something I need you to see." Her brow furrowed as she picked up the phone, her face paling as she scrolled through the messages I had saved. They weren't mine, they were hers. Every message she had sent to the man she'd been seeing during our marriage, every confession of love, every secret rendezvous spelled out in black and white. "John," she stammered, her voice trembling, "where did you—" "I found them," I said coldly. "I wanted to remind myself of what you're capable of before I made any decisions." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought we were moving past this. I thought you forgave me." I leaned back in my chair, watching as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. "Forgiveness?" I said with a bitter laugh. "That's funny. You destroyed our marriage, Emily. You didn't just betray me. You made me question everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. And you thought I'd just let that go?" She stared at me, her expression shifting from shock to devastation. "You wanted to know if we could move forward," I continued, my voice cold and steady. "The answer is no. But I wanted you to feel what it's like to have someone lie to your face, to believe in a future that doesn't exist. I wanted you to understand the depth of what you did to me." Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of months of planning and patience. "I hope you enjoy the taste of betrayal," I said as I stood and walked to the door. "Because it's all you've left me with." I left her apartment without looking back, her sobs echoing in my ears. For the first time since the affair, I felt a sense of closure. Not because I had healed, but because I had finally taken control. Megan was gone, Emily was broken, and I was free. The world hadn't righted itself, but for the first time in months, I felt the bitter satisfaction of revenge. Walking away from Emily's apartment felt surreal. Her sobs were still echoing in my mind, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered the months of anguish, the sleepless nights, the image of her wrapped in someone else's arms while I sat at home trying to fix what I didn't even know was broken. No, I hadn't gone too far. I'd done exactly what she deserved. I spent the weekend alone, replaying the events of the past few months in my head. Every move, every word, had been deliberate. I'd set the stage, and Emily had walked right into it. The satisfaction I felt wasn't pure. It was tinged with bitterness and a strange emptiness I hadn't anticipated. But it was real. This wasn't about forgiveness or closure anymore. It was about balance. Emily had tipped the scales when she betrayed me, and now I had evened them. The aftermath of my confrontation with Emily spread quickly through our social circles. Claire called me the following Monday, her tone a mix of concern and curiosity. "What the hell happened with Emily?" she asked. "She's been a wreck all weekend." I feigned confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "She said you two were working things out, and then you blindsided her with something." "She wouldn't tell me what." I let out a bitter laugh. "We weren't working things out, Claire. She thought we were, but I just needed her to understand what it feels like to be lied to be manipulated." Claire was silent for a moment. "John, I get that you're angry, but don't you think that's a little harsh?" "Harsh?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you know what it's like to give someone everything, only for them to tear it apart like it's nothing? She earned this, Claire. Every single bit of it." Claire didn't argue, but I could sense her discomfort. That was fine. I wasn't looking for approval or understanding. I'd done what I needed to do, and I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I hadn't heard from Megan since she stormed out of my apartment, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she reached out. Sure enough, a week later, I got a text. "Can we talk?" I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Megan deserved closure, if nothing else, and I wasn't afraid of whatever she had to say. We met at a small park near her apartment, the kind of place where everything felt public but still private enough for serious conversations. She arrived wearing a tense expression, her arms crossed as if she were bracing herself for impact. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her tone clipped. I nodded. "What's on your mind?" She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "I need to know, was any of it real?" I didn't flinch. "What do you mean?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You know exactly what I mean, John. Us. Everything we went through together. Was it real, or was I just part of your twisted plan to get back at Emily?" Her accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered lying. But then I decided there was no point. Megan deserved the truth, even if it hurt. "At first, it was real," I admitted. "You helped me through some of the darkest days of my life, and I'll always be grateful for that." "But," she prompted, her voice sharp, "but as time went on, it became something else," I continued. "When I saw how much Emily's betrayal had affected you too, I realized I could use that to my advantage. I didn't plan for things to go this far, but once they did," Megan's face hardened, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "So, I was just a pawn," she said flatly. "I didn't see it that way at the time," I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "But I understand why you would." Megan shook her head, letting out a shaky breath. "You're unbelievable, John. You used me, you manipulated Emily, and for what? To feel better about yourself? To get some twisted sense of revenge?" I didn't respond. What could I say? She wasn't wrong. "Good luck," she said finally, her voice trembling with anger. "I hope this was worth it, because you've lost more than you'll ever realize." She walked away without looking back, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a pang of regret. Megan's words lingered long after she was gone. Had I lost more than I'd gained? Maybe, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. Emily and I never spoke again after that night. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved to another city, supposedly to get a fresh start. I wondered if she'd ever tell her new friends or partners about what had happened between us, or if she'd rewrite the story to cast herself as the victim. As for me, I found myself alone, but not unhappy. The sense of power, of control, was intoxicating in its own way. I'd taken a life that had been shattered and reshaped it on my terms. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about everything that had transpired. The heartbreak, the manipulation, the revenge. It had all led to this moment. I wasn't the same person I'd been before Emily's betrayal. That man was naive, trusting, willing to give everything for someone who didn't deserve it. The man I had become was harder, colder, and far less willing to forgive. And while I didn't feel whole, I felt something else, something dark, but undeniably satisfying. I felt victorious.